Welcome back, CSE 3200 Yukon stores. We are in our final video for Chapter 9. When we run our application right now, it just runs hello world because activity underscore main just is our default, and our main activity was our default main activity. And we got to change that. Okay, so one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to go into our activity underscore main. And let's see, what order should we do this in? We'll get rid of this, or we'll move that down, okay? Now, we're going to take this much code. We'll keep the Android X, but we're going to get rid of the constraint layout, and we are going to make it a fragment host. I can't remember what this is called. I start typing fragment, and it gives me fragment container view. I want the top one. The tag on the bottom changes appropriately. Now, this stuff shouldn't matter anymore. And so once I got rid of the hello world, which is still showing up in the preview, I don't need this anymore either. Okay. Oh, that wasn't the preview. That was me running the app. So if I have the preview, hello world is now gone. Okay. So ID still says main. Okay, I probably will change that, but we need to put one thing in here. Android : name is equal to, in double quotes, we want our crime detail fragment, but we need the fully qualified name, I think. I'm going to try without. Crime detail fragment. No, I can't do it without. It wants the fully qualified name. Now let's run it. And when I run it, this is what I get. All right, so that's really the only thing I had to change, but I am going to change this ID to fragment underscore container, because that's what its responsibility is now. So I think that's appropriate. I'm going to stop this. If I run it now, I don't know what's going to happen because I changed the ID. And on the main side, it expects that ID. So yeah, just crashed. Right there it is. So we'll change this to fragment container. Bit of a cosmetic change. But it should work again if I run it. And it should work pretty fast. Now, grayed out, and I can start typing. And it doesn't do anything. If I go away and I come back, that information should be lost. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it. But as soon as I started typing, it would give me black text, which is probably a good reason why in fragment detail crime, I would want to keep my title as something blank instead of something like this, because it would show up as black as just my default title. Let's give that a try. No, it doesn't. And that's because that text is not in the title, okay? Our title is part of crime, and our text box didn't say go to the crime and get the title. If it did, then it would have fetched that, that goofy title that I put in there, and it would have been black. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, so it is working now, but it is it's not working so great. So imagine that I have a list and it's got 100 different crimes in it, and I click on crime 1 and I go back, I click on crime 2, I go back. Every time I went over to a view, that view is going to be in memory even though I can't see it anymore. So I'm going to try to free up that memory. Now my first attempt is not going to work, and we'll see that pretty quickly. Let me see where I want to be here. All right, in between onCreateView and onViewCreated seems fine because there is another method that a fragment has that an activity does not. It not only has an onDestroy, but it has an onDestroy view. So where I have onCreateView, I'm going to put its opposite. Override fun onDestroyView. So you are going to need to know those three methods as new methods that the activity or the fragment class has that the activity class did not have, and you're going to need to know the responsibility of each. So if in onDestroy I decide to say, well, for the particular view, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my binding is null. That feels like it should work, but as soon as I hit enter, it said, oh, wait a minute, no, you can't. And can you figure out why? We didn't say that binding could be null. And we actually can't say that our original binding can be null. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new binding, and it's going to be called a back binding. We're just going to use an underscore in front of the word binding, but when we say it, we are going to say back binding. So we're going to come up here to the top. And that line 17 below, it will get commented out, and it's going to be changed significantly. Private var, it's not going to be late init because I'm setting it right now. Private var underscore binding, read back binding, will be of type fragment crime detail binding, but we're going to make sure that it can be nullable, and we'll say, well, we're setting it now, and we're going to set it to null. Comment out this line here. Now, when we set our binding, private val binding, enter, 1, 2, 3, 4, get pren equals check not null, check for the underscore binding, check that it's not null. And then you could put a message inside of a lambda here, failed to access binding, something like that. Okay, so I'll explain this a little bit later, but now we have a back binding which can be null, and will get set to null at first, and a val binding, and that val binding is going to be, well, whatever the back binding is. We'll check to see if it is null or not. If it is not null, then it will return it. If it is null, then it is going to return this string instead. That's what this check not null function does. So now we can come down to our two cases where we have our binding, and it's underlined, right? Because we did not say we didn't say that we were going to reset the binding, right? We said the binding is going to be basically reliant on the back binding. So this is going to be the back binding, and this is also going to be the back binding. Okay, now I'm going to give that a try and just make sure that everything works as expected. I'll check over my code too to see if maybe anything could have failed. And I can type there, I can check the checkbox. I can't do anything with the button. It's grayed out. Okay, nothing failed there. All right, so when does the binding ever get set? Well, the binding doesn't get set here. The back binding gets set for the first time. Well, it was set to null, so I guess that's not true. It was set to null right here. But it gets set to something other than null right now and gets returned. So now at this point, the view has been inflated and the back binding is in play. Now, this doesn't get hit, not until we leave the application and on destroy, hang on a second. I said that this was going to be on destroy view, not on destroy. There we go, on destroy view. So that means that this better be super.onDestroy view. My apologies. So where does it get hit for the first time? Right here. So right here, when it calls binding, it goes, okay, well, what's binding? And then it goes and hits this, and it says, well, what about the back binding? And since the back binding has been set, it sets it to basically a copy of the binding, the back binding at that time. Difference being one is nullable and one is not. And that ends chapter 9 on fragments. I will see you in chapter 10 on Recycler View. We're going to make our list. See you there.